So page 7, I am going to leave to you. Okay, so if you didn't get it done, you can do that. It's very easy. All you have to do is describe Darwin's idea of descent with modification. You want to be familiar with this term of descent with modification. Okay, actually, when he wrote his book in the beginning, he didn't actually use the word evolution. We use the word evolution now, but he mostly used descent with modification. I'm actually reading one of his books right now on the few days where I actually have time to read for myself. It's not On the Origin of Species, the book he's most famous for. It is called The Voyage of the Beagle, and it's about basically his journal from when he was on the Beagle traveling around, which is where he got his inspiration for his book on the origin of species. So it's very interesting because he talks a lot about what he's seeing. He goes to places and he's basically just like observing what's around him. And so it's really interesting to read, I think. But he does focus a lot on like, what animals is he finding there? How are those animals different than other places he has been? He actually focuses a lot on humans too, something that we don't really think as much about with Darwin, but he was observing human behavior, human actions as well. Because where he was in like South America, and there was a lot of the Indians and the gauchos, he was calling them, which is like the cowboys and Indians kind of an idea, right? So there was a lot of like battles and wars and drama between those two, and he talks a lot about that as well. Okay, so all you have to do is read through that article and give me a little summary, describe his idea there, okay? How do whales evolve? I want to go through this together. So this is a really good example of looking at evolution because there's a lot of fossil evidence. There is a place either on this slide or not on your computer at all. Okay. There's a place, I want to say it's in Africa, somewhere on the African continent, but I don't remember exactly. But with archaeologists, it's known as the whale graveyard. And basically, there is a ton of fossils in this one span of area. And the large amount of fossils in that area gives a lot of clues to how whales have evolved. So we're going to look at 3 links, and in the box, you're just going to summarize how the information we have about the evolution of whales supports Darwin's idea of descent with modification. Okay, so let's look at some of those links. Okay, so here's an article, but you have an article, an image, and a movie. So I'm just going to kind of read it to you, and I want you to be thinking and even taking notes. Getting this open? I'm going to read it to you. Get some ideas of what you can take from this to symbolize descent with modification. Okay, so what springs to mind when you think of a whale? Blubber, blowholes, and flukes are among the hallmarks of the roughly 80 species of cetaceans alive today. But because they are mammals, we know that they must have evolved from land-dwelling ancestors. That's kind of a clue to the story. They came from something that lived on land. About 375 million years ago, the first tetrapods, vertebrates with arms and legs, pushed themselves out of the swamps and began to live on land. This major evolutionary transition set the stage for all subsequent groups of land-dwelling vertebrates, including a diverse lineage called synapsids, which originated about 306 million years ago. So, life started in the ocean. Okay? At some point, life came out of the ocean, and that's where we got our tetrapods. Okay? Animal life, I will say. There was a specific fish kind of species that first came up onto land and then evolved from there. So though these creatures, such as Dimetrodon, looked like reptiles, they were actually archaic precursors of mammals. By the time the first mammals evolved 200 million years ago, dinosaurs were dominant vertebrates. Mammals diversified in the shadow of the great archosaurs, and they remained fairly small and secretive, until the non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out by a mass extinction. Global catastrophe cleared the way for major radiation of mammals. When they say radiation, in terms of evolution, that means a lot of diversity happened at this time. The word radiation, what that means is, for example, like mammals, there might have been a couple types of mammals. And it said like they were small, secretive, they were more like burrowing rats and moles and things like that. But once the big dinosaurs went away, there was a major radiation. So that means a lot of evolutionary offshoots and branches. If you look at the tree of life, this is what we would call radiation. It like radiated out the type, the amount of. Okay, so this big radiation happened after all the dinosaurs went away. It was only about 10 million years after this extinction and more than 250 million years since the earlier tetrapods that the first whales evolved. These early cetaceans were not like the whales we know today. And only recently have paleontologists been able to recognize them. For more than a century, our knowledge of the whale fossil record was so sparse that no one could be certain what the ancestors of whales looked like. Now the tide has turned. Ancestral creatures are stranger than you ever expected. There was no straight line march of terrestrial mammals leading up to fully aquatic males, but an evolutionary riot of amphibious cetaceans that walked and swam along rivers, estuaries, and coasts. As strange as modern whales are, their fossil predecessors were even stranger. So let me see. I'm trying to read every single thing here. So this basically is just kind of talking about all of the different types of fossils that they found and the different structures. So I wish we had time to read through all of it, but it's kind of hard to imagine them, right? One of the main ones, the Basilosaurus, is one of the predecessors. And it looks like this. So yeah, so basically it says here, not long after the true identity of Basilosaurus was resolved, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by means of natural selection raised questions about how whales evolved. The fossil record was so sparse that no definite determination could be made. But in a thought experiment included in On the Origin of Species, Darwin speculated about how natural selection might create a whale-like creature over time. So basically what this is kind of talking about is that there's different species that they're finding, Basilosaurus, Squalodon, and different kind of layers. I'll show you an image, which I think makes more sense. So another one, Dorodon, Protocetus. These are all kind of levels in the steps of the evolution of these whales. So let's actually look at one of the images. Here's the image. So in looking at these fossils, basically we want to look at the change in traits. So this is where you can probably get a lot of inspiration for summarizing. Here's our modern whale. Okay, this is a baleen whale. This is a very common structure, skeletal structure for a whale. So if we look at this whale compared to the ones before it, what are some major differences that we're seeing? Take the trick. Huh? Legs. Okay, let's start with legs. Okay. Which legs? What's different?
The first one, hind legs.
Okay, let's start with hind legs. Okay, so hind legs. In the modern whale, these are the hind legs. Look how tiny they are. They don't even do anything at all. If you look at a whale, do you see legs in the back? No, you don't even see them. So descent with modification idea. Let's look at the whale right before that. It has back legs, but still little, right? Compared to the one before that, definitely had some back legs. Okay, and before that. So one thing you could write down with the descent to with modification is that in the modern whale, we see remnants of back legs, which slowly changed over time. As we go backwards in time, we can see that the legs was like a slow transition, right? Another thing that we're seeing here is that the Tachocetus, Ambulocetus, those, do you think those look like they were swimming or walking? Walking. So the first three, the bottom three, were terrestrial. And then at some point, the foot evolved to be more like a fin skeleton, right? Notice how it's like web looking and spread out. So then at Rhodocetus and Durodon and our modern whales, they are aquatic. Okay. Oh, because it's because of the branches. So basically both of these had a common ancestor. This is, when they found this fossil, they measured it to be about 48 and this one to be about 52. But they both came from a common ancestor. Okay, so we noticed that just back legs in general. What's another trait that looks different? The head definitely looks like it's differently shaped. Okay. One thing you can't necessarily see on here, but you could write it if you want, is the snout at the top, the blowhole. That actually used to be the nostrils. So when we look at the skeletons over time, you can kind of see nostrils a little bit here. But the nostrils that started in the terrestrial predecessors, slowly, they saw them basically slowly start moving up the side of the head, and eventually they merged at the top. So the blowhole used to be the nostrils of the terrestrial. And again, descent with modification, we're seeing that over time, it's modified, right? We didn't just jump straight from a land mammal to this modern whale. It's a stepwise, right? Yeah, definitely the mass of fat and skin around is probably different. Also the tail. If you look at the length of the tail compared to where the legs come off, this thing's got a super long tail. Super long tail. This tail is, the skeleton is much shorter, right? It still has its fin, but it's much shorter. Right. Another thing you can kind of see here, the feet. Okay, let's look at the front feet. This modern whale has more of a webbed skeleton, right, for its little fin. If you go down to the beginning, these were actually hooves, more like a horse. So the original was a hooved mammal with nostrils on the side of its face, and terrestrial. Those hooves eventually started to spread out, right? Because can you imagine swimming with just a hoof? Like that's not very efficient for swimming, right? Although pigs can swim, yes. I seen it on Bachelor. Yeah, they can, but but you're much more efficient if you have a webbed hand, right? Like a web. So we can basically kind of see and summarize the descent with modification. We can see through the fossil evidence that the back legs started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and now they're basically gone. We saw the hooves change from a hoof to appendages and then into a webbed fin. And we saw the nostrils also. Also the size. Look, I think this gray is supposed to be like size comparison. This one's tiny. Barely see it. Yeah, and there's more things actually too. I think in terms of like their lungs and like other organs on the inside. But
that's supposed to be like a rat.
yeah, basically.
But a mouse that has food.
Yeah.
Are you sure that's in the size comparison? Do you think it's like the size of like a small dog maybe?
Probably. I don't think it would be as small as a rat, but because that baleen whale is ginormous. Okay, so hopefully you've summarized at least a couple of the structures. Do I need to give you a minute to actually write? Give you a minute. I'll get our video ready. The video, I think, does a good job because it's kind of more visual. It's cartoony, so you're not actually looking necessarily at some realistic fossils, but I think on this topic there's a main scientist who is kind of known for being like the whale person who figured all this out. And he has a whole book that he wrote about all of this stuff. I know there's long video. I've seen a video that was like over an hour long that talked about like in depth the evolution of whales. Because there's a lot of structures. And if we go back, actually, sorry, I'll stop talking speaking. Yeah, I think it's just floating. So it's what we call a vestigial trait. Doesn't have a function anymore. Which is evidence for evolution because why would this be here except for the fact that it came from a previous evolved ancestor? Yeah. Well, yeah, our tailbone is a vestigial trait. The only thing it does is hurts really bad when you fall on it. You know, some humans are actually born with little tails. And then you don't usually see them because, especially in our country, in our culture, we cut them off. But in other cultures, they leave them because it's a sign of like, you're a special human being. Okay. Oh, what I was gonna say. If we take this back to our 5 tenets, right? Thinking about how this could have happened. Is it possible that the organisms that we were looking at could have been overpopulated? Okay. That can happen with any species. What happens after that? Overpopulation happens. And then number 2 was what? Genetic variation. So genetic variation could have existed, right? We have maybe a hoof versus appendages. Okay, so let's just go with that difference. Okay, so now we've got a species that some of them have hooves and some of them have fingers. What's the next thing? Selective pressure. Okay, so let's say that for some reason, this organism isn't going to do well on land anymore. Okay, it's not competing well on land. So what is a good choice for it to do? go back into the water. This is an interesting story because mammals, technically we started in the ocean, then we came out of the ocean, evolved from there, and then this evolved to go back into the ocean. So maybe something's eating all of them and it can't get away. So maybe it's going to be better for it to go back into the ocean. And to do better in the ocean, is it better to have a hoof or a fin? A fin. So we have a selective pressure of maybe predators on land. And then, so now we have this adaptation that makes some of them better than others. So after mutation. So after the selective pressure, we have what? Survival of the fittest, differential survival. So the ones with the fins probably survived better. I know I'm jumping a few steps here. The ones with the fins probably survived better. So our fifth tenet, if some of them are surviving better, what's going to happen to the alleles? Increase in frequency. So the fins are going to increase in frequency and the hooves are going to die off in frequency. And over time, that happens enough where we actually get a new species. And sometimes this old one might go extinct or it might still try to survive, but this is what leads to us getting billions of years. Okay.
Wow.
What is the evidence for evolution? The theory of biological evolution makes two very bold claims about living creatures. First, all living things on Earth are related. They evolved from a common ancestor. Second, the evolution of living things is powered by natural processes, things which can be studied and understood.
But is there really any evidence that these two claims are true? Yes. There are so many observable facts from so many different fields of study that the only way we can even begin to talk about them is to group them into categories or lines of evidence.
It's actually our next unit.
To keep things simple, here we'll focus on evolution's first claim that all living things on Earth are related. We cannot tackle the entire tree of life at once. After all, there's an estimated 8.7 million species alive today. So instead, we'll focus most of our attention on one fairly small but fascinating branch of the evolutionary tree, cetaceans. This branch includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Biologists tell us that all these creatures are closely related, and that the entire group evolved from an ancient four-legged land mammal. Instead of taking their word for it, let's look at the facts. We'll start by looking at a few from the field of comparative anatomy, the study of differences and similarities between living things.
All right, so that's kind of what we did already. We looked at the fossils, right? In terms of the descent part. Oh, is it 10 or 20? Yeah. Oh, it's 10. I'm sorry, I was going till 20. We're not gonna have time to watch this video Monday. So I suggest you watch this video, get your summary filled up. So you should have, is that all? So you want to come with page 7 and half of page 8 then, okay? Have your Darwin and your whales done by the time you come Monday. Sorry, I was on from the old schedule. We never have enough time. But good job on that quiz. Like you guys did pretty good on those scores. All right. Don't forget. So again, if you are interested in getting volunteer hours from being a camp counselor, there's an opportunity where you have to apply before Monday, by Monday at the latest. But you can hear more at Interact Club at lunch. We're also voting on t-shirt designs and talking about a couple of other things. Bye, please. Hey, Karina.
I gotta get my gators.
Yeah, important. How did you get that quiz done so fast? Everybody else took so much longer.
Well, we've already done natural selection.
freshman year. Do you feel like this topic just kind of comes easy to you?
Yeah,
It just kind of makes sense.
I did a lot of
Bye.
during when COVID started. I always had to like